Welcome back to Animal Crossing New Horizons. I'm dear darling. Should we see what's going on on our lovely island of Fawnhallow today? Relaxing as per usual. Late night recording because D&D session today. Also a little bit more delayed because I had issues with my game capture somehow. I don't know how what happened, but it just wasn't capturing. But now there's a second game capture which does capture, so I'm like, okay, I guess it reset itself or something. I've honestly got no clue. But anyway, what are we going to talk about today? Okay, I'll get into that in a second. Good evening, everyone. Right now in Fawnhallow, it's 10:53 PM on Monday, 19th of May, 2025. I suppose the first 5 minutes, how was D&D? It was pretty good, I think. It's very much a lead up into what I'm assuming might be the end, or not might be the end of Act 2, but might be the climax, I think, of Act 2. Or be it's a very big build up, you know. It's been a long time in the works and the making for this coming, and it's certainly going to be an interesting one. I didn't expect it to happen exactly now, because I'm sort of back and forth, you know. This is like future sight that after the fight I'm like, one of my players would want to level up, but I kind of already leveled them up really recently because I didn't think we'd get to this point yet. So I'm sort of just, I'm basically debating in my head, well, why don't we have an earlier level up? We've already had a bit of an earlier level up, to be honest, so maybe not. But maybe I'll just keep my eyes peeled for the next good opportunity when I'm just like, it kind of works for level up, and I'll level them up. Anyway, I'm not even sure if this will be the case, because maybe it won't happen exactly as I've transpired, so maybe they won't level up. Anyway, there's not a lot I can say about it, because everything which has really happened kind of is either resolved or is open question, and obviously I can't answer the open question because that would be spoilers. But there's like little smatterings, I think, of things which feed together into into a larger scale of the story. My players basically know, you know, if they're assembling the puzzle, I don't think they have all the pieces in place, but they know what the picture is, essentially. Is probably how I describe it, so I'm certainly not worried about, well, I don't think I should be worried about that anymore. Again, I don't want to pull the wool over their eyes, but, oh, my pockets are full. Okay, berry again. But yeah, so I can't really say stuff until some of the threads get closed, if anything. But yeah, what are we going to talk about today, though, in our actuality, outside of D&D? The reason I laughed at the beginning is because I've thought of something which I was going to talk about at some point, but then just didn't. But like non-Newtonian fluids, and I know this is so incredibly scientific, but trust me, it's not as scientific as you might think, because for one, I don't know that much about material. Is it material science it falls under? I'm not actually sure. I guess it'd be fluid dynamics. Anyway, not the point. The point being, if you don't know what a non-Newtonian fluid is, then you can go YouTube or look up some videos of like Oobleck, O-O-B-L-E-C-K probably, which is, I think, the most famous non-Newtonian fluid. But a Newtonian fluid is basically a fluid like water, where under, not pressure, but under stress, under like impact or whatever, the viscosity, so how runny it is, behaves the same, I believe. And water is the classic example, you know. This will make more sense later, but if you apply a force to water, it doesn't suddenly like stiffen or it doesn't become more runny. It behaves as a Newtonian fluid, and I think most fluids probably are Newtonian, but there's a decent amount of fluids which are non-Newtonian, which don't act in a way you might expect. And I think cornstarch plus water, i.e. Oobleck, is the most common one, which people know, because I think that's one that people always do in their science experiments in schools, at least we did. But it's basically a mix of cornstarch water. You can do it at home if you have cornstarch, to be honest. But it's very interesting sort of fluid, because if you just sort of leave it be, or perhaps a better way to put it is, if you put it in a container and you punch it really hard, it will stiffen up. It will shear thicken, as it's called, because you apply a shear force to it and it thickens itself, essentially. So it solidifies, kind of. Like, it almost feels like you're punching something quite tough. But then if you just put your hand on it and slowly sink into it, it will behave as a liquid, because you're applying a much smaller gradual force to it. So the stress it's under is much lower, and it behaves closer to a Newtonian fluid in that sense. that's one note people always know, water and cornstarch. And you can see that sort of thing where if you ever do it as a science experiment, you know, you'll put it in like a tray or something, and you'll get like a heavy object and you'll drop it onto it, and it will just like bonk, like it hits a solid object over top, or a pretty dense object, like it hits sand or something as it sits on top, and then it will slowly start to envelop and sink into the oobleck itself. And that in itself is fascinating, because I think, at least when I heard about this non-Newtonian fluid, or specifically this type of non-Newtonian fluid called dilatants, I think. I'm not actually sure that's how you say it. Dilatant? I don't know. You know what, this is a Google question, not a me question. Let's learn something. It does not say. Merriam-Webster?
Dilatant.
Dilatant, okay. It's a dilatant fluid. It kind of blew my mind. I think I first heard about it on Mythbusters when they were trying to like myth bust running on water or something. And they were like, well, you know, we can't run on water, but maybe we can run on a different type of water, or a different type of liquid. And this one being water plus cornstarch. And the way it works is actually very fascinating. And I don't know the exact details off my head, but basically oobleck is a mixture of water and cornstarch. And it's something like the particles, if you impact it with a lot of force, ends up, it's like the water particles move faster than the cornstarch particles. So if you apply a lot of strong force to it, the cornstarch particles will basically force the water particles out of the way and into other cracks. And it will, basically, you will just be pushing against the cornstarch particles, and cornstarch being just a powder means you're effectively pushing against a solid. So if you hit it with a lot of force, the cornstarch particles don't have enough time to get out of the way, but the water particles do. Something like that. And then it basically solidifies. But if you do it slowly, both the water particles and the cornstarch particles can move together, and then allow space for whatever solid objects come through, so it moves like a liquid. And I'm like, that's such a fascinating thing. Viscosity, I mean, is something which, it sounds a lot fancier than it is, but it's something which you all have an inherent understanding of. It's basically how runny a liquid is. And I think most commonly you kind of know about viscosity more so to do with temperature. Like imagine, I'm trying to think of a good example. Of like something which moves slowly and then you heat it up and then it moves really quickly, like caramel or something. I think a lot of these sweet treats certainly do. Honey probably is a similar thing. Oh yeah, we should also look whose bag this is. This is biscuits. And that's a very fascinating thing, but to have liquids which change depending on how much impact you impart on it, depending on the time frame, is fascinating. How does that happen? How can that even work? I don't know, and I don't know really. I mean, what about the explanation? It's sort of like, that's a most fascinating thing as a consequence of, I don't know, I guess particles? I was going to say particle physics, but that's very much not particle physics. But anyway, the thing I was going to talk about is not that, because that is fascinating in its own right, but, you know, at this point it's old hat. Well, it's old hat to me, because I already know about it. I'm sure a lot of people do as ready. It's not a surprise anymore, but it's still fascinating and it's really cool. But what I found even more fascinating is I never really thought about the fact that there are probably non-Newtonian fluids which go in the other direction, where when you apply a force to them, they become even thinner. And, you know, I don't even know where I saw it. I just saw that dilatant was the name of like oobleck, and then I saw that pseudo-plastic was the name of the other one. And I feel like maybe it came up when I used to do physics, but I honestly don't remember. This was definitely a lesson I forgot. And I'm probably hearing that name pseudo-plastic, you know, something, I'm thinking about it being like, oh, a liquid which gets thinner the more force you apply to it. I was like, oh, this must be some really like obscure chemical compound or something, which I've never heard of. And then the example it gave was like ketchup, and I was like, what? Ketchup is a non-Newtonian fluid? And if you think about it, it absolutely is. I never really thought about it before, but basically ketchup is something which becomes runnier the more force you apply to something. I think an example that they gave, which immediately clarified it for me, but I think that's a better example, is imagine you had like, if you've ever had just like a lump of ketchup on your or like in a little saucer sachet, not sachet, but like one of those little paper ramekins. I don't know what they're called. And if you could imagine doing something like putting like something dense on it, like I think a ping pong ball is what they said. If you had like a paper plate full of ketchup, the ping pong ball is not going to sink into the liquid of a ketchup, because ketchup holds its shape. I mean, you can put it down on a pile on your plate and it holds its own shape, right? You can put something on top of it and it'll be fine. It will hold its shape completely fine. It will hold up the ping pong ball. It won't sink into it like a traditional liquid would. But if you take that ping pong ball and you drop it from a height and it lands on the ketchup, that ketchup's going it's going splat everywhere. If you've ever dropped something onto ketchup and you got it all over your clothes, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, because that's probably a relatable experience which has happened to everyone. But just placing something on top of a ketchup is completely fine. It's not going to do anything. And that kind of blew my mind. I was like, whoa, I never even thought about the fact that ketchup has that crazy property. What a weird liquid it behaves as. Like, in my mind, it's always like, oh, it's basically just like a really thick liquid. But I never thought about the fact that if you impact it, then, yeah, its viscosity just drops completely. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then, you know, make a little pile of ketchup on a plate or something. And you can observe and see how the fact it retains its shape, you know, it's quite thick. And then get a spoon and just like whack it down into the ketchup and you'll see it splatter everywhere. Instead of just, you know, what would be like a thick liquid which just spreads out. Instead of like, I don't know, like a soft butter or something, which would just sort of dent. And like, that's fascinating. There's some other examples as well. I think there's like paint or whatever, or certain types of paint can also be a pseudoplastic. But it also explains a lot about if you've ever had a ketchup bottle, a glass ketchup bottle, it's why hitting it on the side actually does something and allows it to run. I always thought it was hitting it dislodges the ketchup and allows it to sort of come out, and that's technically true in a sense, but what it's actually doing is more than that. It's not just dislodging it, it's dislodging it because the impact of your force against the ketchup is decreasing the viscosity of the ketchup and it allows it to run out, which makes a lot of sense. Because if you've ever had a glass bottle, the plastic bottles, like you can just kind of squeeze and it comes out, but glass bottles, if you can't squeeze a glass bottle. So this entire time I thought like shaking it or whatever would just be like, oh yeah, it's just like moving it around so it's like no longer stuck to the side. But if you think about it, you often like shake it with a lid on. I mean, you open the lid and then it still pours out when it didn't pour out before. That's because its viscosity for that moment is decreased. And I'm like, that blew my mind. That might mean absolutely nothing to you, and you might just be like, well, yeah, I mean, just ketchup just works like that. But that's so weird to think about, isn't it? Or is that just me thinking about it in that way? Just goes like, that's crazy. I can't believe ketchup has that property. You know, it's such a unique and unusual property. I think that I guess the crazy part is the fact that ketchup itself has it, rather than any liquid has that property. You know, and that's what I find most fascinating about it. And you might not share my fascination with it, and that's okay. But I do, and that's the important part. So yeah, I don't know, non-Newtonian fluids. There's also different types of non-Newtonian fluids, like toothpaste is technically one. It's called a different type, but I can't remember it. It's something like you apply force and it deforms, but then it holds its shape otherwise, or something like that. Yeah, I don't know. I just found it fascinating that such a common, object holds such a unique property. I don't even know if it's that unique, to be honest. Like, I don't know if it's actually more liquids have that property than don't of being a pseudoplastic, but it's crazy. Like, what other examples do I have? Non-Newtonian liquids. Oh yeah, this graph has got the other ones. It's got the Bingham plastic, that's a toothpaste one. There's also Newtonian fluid, dilatant fluid, pseudoplastic. Yield pseudoplastic. I feel like I do remember the phrase pseudoplastic. Or maybe I think of shear point for a plastic, where if you go beyond that stretching point, then it deforms and it can't reset itself. Bingham pseudo-plastic? What is that going on? Like so, Bingham plastic, I don't even really understand. He's like a solid at low stresses, but flows like viscous fluid at high stresses. Bingham plastic versus pseudo-plastic. Why do we call plastics this anyway? I guess a pseudo-plastic has to be a liquid, but Bingham plastic is straight up a solid. So I guess it's more of a state change. I don't know, I just find it fascinating. I feel like I might have spoken about this before, like really recently. And if I did, then it's worth speaking about again because I'm just like, come on, non-Newtonian fluid, that's crazy. Newtonian. Did I not? Huh. Something in my mind was like I spoke about this really recently, but I guess I didn't. Anyway, the other thing I was going to say is like, why have we called it oobleck? What a weird name to give something, you know? Let's see, what other non-Newtonian fluids are there? Yeah, we keep giving ketchup as the example, and I'm just like, fascinating. But the thing I saw, which he said was like, they don't really know how pseudoplastics work yet. They don't understand the dynamics behind it. And liquid dynamics, I think, is always crazy, to be honest. But yeah, I think it's always fascinating to see the science behind a lot of these different things. I wonder if it's just like an inverse of a sort of thing. You apply stress to it or something, and then the mix of particles move too quickly out of the way when you apply too much stress or something. Or like forcibly shunts them apart, but then on low stress or something it doesn't have, it sort of just like sticks to each other. I'm basically just trying to invert the logic of how oobleck works to make it somehow work with pseudoplastics, which I don't think is going to be that cut and dry, but can't blame me for trying, can you? Maybe you can, I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. Just think about ketchup a bit more and get your mind blown by its unusual properties. Or if you're not mind blown, then I guess only I will have my mind blown by it. Well, mind blown is kind of like a strong way to put it, because that makes it sound like it changed my world. It didn't change my world, but it did make me sort of go, whoa, that's crazy, science is awesome. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this episode up here, so if you have been watching, thank you very much. It's been Animal Crossing New Horizons. I've been Dear Darling. Likes, comments, subscription, shares, greatly appreciated. Socials, Discord down below. Hope to see you again, but for now, it's our farewell. So until next time, bye-bye for now.